my name is Robert Melso with the Pro-Liberty Forum. Our guest today is Dr. Tom Giordano, who's written a book, UnaLIENable. This is the third in a series of interviews that we're doing with Tom, or I should say Dr. Giordano.
You could call me Tom.
We're going to ask him about chapter 1 in this book, which I found fascinating. Again, the book is UnaLIENable, what it really means and why it matters. Dr. Giordano, I'm sure that readers of this book would want to know a little bit about your father, who had a big influence on your life. In the book, you go into some detail about him. It turns out he was a high school dropout and who then went on to become a college professor, developed methods for learning that were acclaimed throughout the country.
And the world.
With that in mind, can you tell us a little bit more about him and what made him so special and why he was able to overcome his initial status?
Well, my father was like many other people in his generation. All of a sudden, they're living their lives during the Depression in Philadelphia, for him in particular. And all of a sudden, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And my father at the time was 17 years old. His older brothers, Frank and Nick, my Uncle Nick and my Uncle Frank, they enrolled immediately in the United States Army. My father was too young to go in, and my grandfather would not sign off for him at 17. So he dropped out. He finished the 10th grade.
He wanted to enlist.
Oh, yeah. He absolutely wanted to defend our country. He had to wait until his 18th birthday, and on his 18th birthday, he enlisted in the United States Navy. So that immediately cut into his education. He did not finish high school because he went to go serve in the Navy.
I understand from the book that he earned some Purple Hearts, and
oh yeah, he was wounded 3 times, 2 times by shrapnel from Japanese bombs, and 1 time he was hit by a bullet from a Japanese Zero on a destroyer when he was being transported from one island to another.
So a true American hero amongst many.
He was to me.
Okay, so Dr. Giordano, your father went to the war, earned his Purple Hearts, and marries, and then he decides at 23 to go back to high school. That must have been quite something to see a 23-year-old man in with 17-year-olds. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
He had always prized a formal education, a higher formal education. My father was impeded by the fact that he didn't have the high school diploma to go to university. And so at 23, he went to Temple University High School and enrolled in the 11th grade in an accelerated course. And he was able to complete the 11th and 12th grades in 1 year. And then he applied as a freshman student to Temple University, to the university. And he came to a realization that he didn't belong where he was, that he was meant for something higher.
Yes. Can I touch on that with you? This is where, to me, it gets very interesting. He goes on to complete his college education.
Yes.
Excels there, regardless of some pressure from one of his professors who didn't believe in the VA program. Right. You can touch on that too if you want. And then goes on to become a college educator. Can you just touch on some of those ideas with me? Yes,
he told me that his first class in the first day of university at Temple, this particular professor asked the veterans who were there on the GI Bill to raise their hands. And they did. And he said, you people aren't going to make it through the first semester. You don't belong in an institution of higher learning. He had this complete disdain for people who are trying to get an education using the GI Bill. But you see, people of my father's generation, they had to face that all the time. And it wasn't something that you would go cry and go hide in the corner.
He faced some discrimination on his own, you could
Oh
say.
yeah, absolutely, directly. This particular professor made his life miserable. He was in the middle of his curriculum, and he was one of those kinds of the core material of the curriculum had to go through him every semester. He had to have at least one class with this guy.
And regardless of that, he graduated with honors.
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, this professor, when he found out that my father was working a full-time job as a maximum security guard on the graveyard shift at Moyamensing Federal Prison in Philly. In other words, he went to school during the day and had a full-time job at night. He petitioned the faculty of the school, the faculty of his college, to deny him the degree because he said by working a full-time job, he had demeaned the degree.
Okay, so let me stop you there and ask you about this. He gets his degree and then goes on to become a college educator. And as I understand it in the book, he was widely acclaimed and became nationally known. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So he worked during the day and then took night classes at Temple University to get his master's in business education, which was awarded to him with honors again in 1960. There was a new opening at a newly formed college in Camden County College. And he applied for a job there as a teaching position. And he very quickly became the head of their business department. He was named president of the night education at Camden County. And basically he spent the rest of his life as an educator at the college level, as a professor there.
And I understand that he developed some avant-garde methods for teaching that
Yes,
to this day are widely acclaimed.
He developed a program called distributive education. Now, at the time in the 50s and 60s, high school education was a big deal. It was worth something back then because it wasn't just given away. And the thing was that most of the kids that had the education, though, were going into industry. They were going into the trades. So my father developed a system where he would give them work experience while in high school, before their graduation, to act as an incentive for future employers, to show them that, hey, listen, this guy, yeah, he's got a high school degree, but he also did a year of, an internship in a garage or in a factory somewhere. And this gave employers the incentive to hire these people because they already knew some of what they had to know in order to be an asset to the company.
In the book, UnaLIENable, it says here in 1969, quote, your father joined forces with Dr. John Stewart II, a professor of history at college, to design the nation's first formal Afro-American civilization course. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. There was a call for a course to be drawn up by the federal government. I think it was the planning board in Washington, D.C. And they granted my father and Dr. Stewart, the materials to put together the first African-American civilization course in the United States. And this was particularly interesting because it was a 6-week course that was designed to inform African-Americans of the importance of their contributions to America and Western civilization in general, and also to provide them with jobs. So it was the first effort to try to get equity, let's say, for the African Americans. Of course, it was during the 60s, which was a time of civil rights and all that. But my father put that together with Dr. Stewart, and it was a very successful program.
Okay, very good.
He did the same thing with business at the college. He created a curriculum called Junior Business Training, where he did the same thing. He applied this distributive type of an education to business people. You see, my father eventually, my father had always pondered the largest problem in let's say the government's educational system, and that was that the pace of education in the classroom was as fast as the slowest person in the room, and that left the average and quicker people bored. And basically, so he developed a methodology where a person could advance at their own intellectual pace. This was called the non-lockstep educational system.
Which brings me to my next question about you.
Yeah.
The non-lockstep system that your father developed,
Yes.
I believe he used that on you to teach you
Oh, yes.
about government and economics.
Absolutely.
Which is what
Absolutely.
we're trying to get to right now at this point in the interview. Why did that work so well with you, and how can it work for the rest of us?
Well, my father told me one thing that I never left my mind, and I've seen this in my professional life too. The difference between a genius and an average person, a normal person, is the time it takes for them to learn something. It has nothing to do with IQ. It's got nothing to do with how many brain cells you have or the size of your brain. It all has to do with how much time it takes for you to learn a specific body of knowledge. Now, what my father did was he developed modules that contained 3 or 4, maybe 5 facts that you would study in a given period of time. They would say, here's the module, study it, we're going to test you on it. When you were able to get all 5 of those facts down pat, you would pass to the next module, and so on and so on and so on, at your own pace.
Your father, Buster, had a saying, there's a difference between a pupil and a student.
Yes.
What is that difference?
Well, the pupil is there against his will. The student is there who's truly interested in learning.
And
you
were the student.
Oh yeah, I was a student, but so was my father. My father was more of a student than I was all of his life. Just simply because he had university degrees, his education didn't end there. But for the most part, people go into formal education for the sheepskin. It doesn't really matter what they know as long as they have a piece of paper to hang on the wall.
And in the book UnaLIENable, you talk about rational observation.
Right.
And how people should be looking at government and our role in society from a rational viewpoint. Can you touch on that for us a little bit?
Yes. When you're dealing with observations, and I know this as a diagnostician, all right, being able to diagnose problems with people, you don't believe your eyes. You don't believe your ears. You don't believe what you hear or what other people tell you. If something
with you, what we're really talking about in this book is a way for you to become a critical thinker.
That's correct. And that was the intention of our educational system in the beginning, to create critically thinking citizens to become assets of our society, because it was the citizen that was there to guide our government and our society. Not somebody on high, not some judge in a black robe. It was the people who were supposed to have the discriminatory abilities to know when they were being hoodwinked and when they weren't.
Dr. Giordano, your father taught you about government, economics, and history. We've already seen how much of an educator he was and that he was a lifelong student. What can you tell me about your way of thinking and his way of thinking that we can pass on to people today?
Well, the first thing is, as my father told me, there was an ancient Greek philosopher who said, believe what your master teaches you, but never swear by it. In other words, things are subject to change with more information. Now, we have a problem in our educational system in that there are people with agendas that are trying to get their particular agenda pushed through. You got to wade through that. If a thing doesn't seem right to you, there's got to be a reason, because you're a rational person. Everybody is rational in their own way, but their conclusions are only as good as the information they have. Now, when you're dealing with what my father taught me, while my father was learning these concepts, I was still a young boy. So he was going through it, and as he was learning it, he would use his prism to teach it to me. But he would do it in a way where I would become illuminated by myself on what I was studying. Even as a young child, you know the material. It's that simple.
Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. UnaLIENable is the book, what it really means and why it matters. On sale at Amazon. Hope you'll check it out. And Dr. Tom will talk to you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.